Okay, welcome to video 5. Today we're going to explore factors and zeros of quadratic equations. So the zeros of the function f of x equals 3x squared minus 3x minus 6 are, and then we're given options. In order to solve this, we need to figure out what the zeros are. And we have a couple of options to do this. We can complete the square, or we can use the quadratic formula, or we can factor. I'm going to factor because I think that this one is set up nice for factoring since I see a GCF here, and then that'll make my numbers even smaller to go ahead and factor with. So I'm going to, because it's a trinomial, I'm going to start with an x box, and I'm going to go ahead and set my equation equal to 0. But before I go ahead and try to fill in this x box, I talked about already that we see a GCF here, so I need to divide by the GCF, which is 3. So I'm going to divide all of this by 3. And when I pretzel method that all out, I end up with x squared minus x minus 2. Now I can go ahead and fill in my x box. So that a times c, a is 1, c is negative 2, so that's going to be negative 2 up top. And then b on the bottom, so it's negative 1. So I need two factors that have a product of negative 2 but a sum of negative 1. So it's going to be negative 2 and 1. And now that I filled that out, depending on if you use the shortcut or not, I can see that that means I'm going to have my x minus 2 and x plus 1, and again I can use that shortcut because the 3 is out front. If you have trouble with that, you can go ahead and do factor by grouping by splitting the b term, and then grouping the first two, grouping the second two, finding the GCF, and you'll get the same work for that part. And then when we set those equal to 0, I can see from this part that I'm going to get my answers of the opposite of these because that's what will make those 0. So my answers are 2 and negative 1. Now, I did make an error in the answer choices here, so I'm just going to change this first option to a positive 2 and negative 1, and that's my correct answer, is choice 1 then. Okay, so let's look at one more together. A polynomial function has zeros of negative 5, 2, and 9. What would the factors of this polynomial function be? So again, remember, they're giving us these x values here, so I know that these are all x values. So in order to find the function, I'm going to figure out what factors those x values came from. So this is telling me that x equals negative 5, but I don't want it to be equal to negative 5. I want it equal to 0 again, because if we work backwards through the t-chart, which we did here, we get the answers, the 2 and the negative 1, from the factors being set equal to 0. So that's the point where we would have set up, and I should have added here the t-chart between the two factors, but I just kind of ran out of space. And the 0 did not equal 3, so we rejected that, and we got our answers of 2 and negative 1. So we're working backwards. I know that the answer is negative 5. So in order to work backwards, I want it equal to 0 again, so I would add 5. So the factor is x plus 5. And then I can do the same thing with the 2. It would be 2, so what factor does that come from? That comes from x minus 2. And then lastly, the 9, what factor does that come from? That comes from x minus 9. Okay, and those are my answers there. So remember, when we're asked to find the factors given the zeros, we just need to work backwards and set those factors that would be set equal to 0. So if we have those x values, make them, instead of being x equals, change to 0. And that would be by doing the opposite of what is there. So that's why we added 5 for the first example there. Okay, so for the rest of this classwork, you're just going to be wanting to examine the zeros, which is also the x-intercepts or roots. Those all mean the same thing, so you're looking for where they cross the x-axis, and just looking at how factors, those are the things that multiply, relate to your zeros, which are once you solve them for 0. And it all comes back to you having the t-chart, when you factor, and getting your answers. These are your zeros, roots, or x-intercepts, and these things that all multiply out when you factor are your factors. Okay, so we'll explore that more in class. Have a good night. See you tomorrow.